share PPT. Oh, yes, now we can.
In full screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much. So hello again, and welcome to the presentation of my study on the effects of activity travel chaining propensity on peak and off-peak travel, comparison between workers and non-workers. So my study focuses on activity travel chains, which is a series of interconnected trips and activities. People link trips and activities to multiple locations with a certain time period and route to save time and costs of travel. In a sense, activity travel chaining is a way to maximize the utility of activity participation and travel between activities. I'll go to the full definition later, but my definition of activity travel chains considers multiple trips between two primary activities, which is home and work in this illustration. The series of trips and activities from home to work, from work to home is considered here as an activity travel chain when a person stops for gas, groceries, and daycare. But I do not consider a single destination round trip from home or work as an activity travel chain. For example, the trip 2 and trip 3, because this is because the person is returning to the same anchor location, and hence there is no secondary activity at as lunch at restaurant is a primary activity of the set of trips. So I'm motivated to conduct this study, as many studies suggest the positive contribution of activity travel chaining in peak hour congestion. In the few studies that analyze the relationship between activity travel chaining and travel demand, they are either indirect effect of activity travel chaining on VMT through the association of trip chains with commute trips, or limited to the measuring the effect for particular sets of trips, not on the net VMT. My study contributes to this research gap by quantifying the direct and indirect impact of activity travel chaining propensities on the peak and off-peak PMT pertaining to all the daily trips carried out by a person. So understanding the relationship between activity travel chaining propensities and PMT will help in forecasting the reliable estimates of PMT, and also knowing the relationships between activity travel chaining, PMT, and the mediating factors can help identify potential areas of intervention to mitigate the peak hour travel demand. So with this motivation, the objectives for this study are to build a conceptual model depicting the hypothesized direct and indirect effect of activity travel chaining propensity on peak and off-peak PMT, to estimate and analyze the hypothesized causal effects between activity travel chaining propensity and peak and off-peak PMT, and make comparison between workers and non-workers. To help with understanding the concept and methodology, I'll first discuss some definitions and terms that are used in this study. I will first discuss the definition of activity travel chain, which is a travel connecting one primary activity and one or more secondary activities. The primary activities are home, work, and activities with a duration greater than 4 hours. Therefore, the secondary activities are non-home or work activities and activities with a duration less than 4 hours. As discussed before, we do not consider home activity home and work activity work as activity travel chains. A study by Lee and McNally finds that activities with longer duration are more likely to be pre-planned, and hence these longer duration activities are more likely to determine the activity attributes of secondary activities. By using the activity duration as a criteria to determine the activity travel chain anchor or primary activities like we did in our studies. So this definition of activity travel chain captures this relationship. I also define the activity travel chaining propensity as the proportion of subsistence, maintenance, and discretionary activities in the activity travel chains out of all the activities carried out in the survey period. The equation here shows the calculation process where the numerator represents the number of activity type J performed by person I, in the activity travel chains. Sorry. And the denominator indicates the total number of activity type J performed by that person. So I categorize the activity into 3 different categories. The subsistence category includes work-related and school activities. The maintenance group includes shopping, errands, healthcare, escort, and dining activities. And the discretionary category includes recreation and socialization activities. I also use a definition of travel time savings ratio, or TTSR, which represents the fraction of travel time saved by chaining activities as opposed to conducting the same activities by separate home-based round trips. To demonstrate the calculation of TTSR, I provide here 2 diagrams. The observed activity travel on the left and a hypothetical unchained activity travel on the right for the same activity locations as on the left. For the situation on the left, we calculate the total travel times by taking the sum of observed travel times, TC. And on the right, we calculate the sum of home-based round-trip travel times, TU, for all the activities, considering none of these activities are in chains. So the equation, the numerator of the equation represents the difference between these 2 travel times, observed versus hypothetical unchained, and the denominator represents the travel times from the unchained activity travel behavior. We also calculate the area of activity space for each person, represented by the area of standard deviational ellipse created by all the activity locations visited by a person during the survey period. And finally, we calculated the peak and off-peak person miles travels for each person, considering the car travel mode. And the peak and off-peak periods vary by each MPO, which I'll discuss in the next slide. And we assign these periods to the MPOs based on their trip distribution. And one example we show here is for the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, or SACOG area, which shows here 3 periods representing the peak traffic hours. So in this study, I used the 2018-19 household travel survey from the 4 MPOs, which are CMAP, or the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, PSRC, or the Puget Sound Regional Council, SACOG, or the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, and WCOG, the Whatcom Council of Governments. The collected datasets contain household person and trips data, and each data set has up to 7 days of observation, except CMAP, which has only 1 day of observation for each person. To prepare the data for analysis, I applied the activity travel chain definition I mentioned in the earlier slide and identified the chained and unchained activities for each worker and non-worker. The mode option for the dataset are restricted to non-motorized transport, or NMT, which includes walk and bike, auto, and transit, as there were insufficient observation for other mode categories. My other data sources are the US EPA's 2021 Smart Location Database to obtain the location characteristics. And I also use the Here Maps REST API to obtain the routed travel times to calculate the value of TTSR. And I extracted the weekday trips for each worker and non-worker in the dataset. The chart here shows the distribution of chained and unchained activities in the combined dataset on the leftmost column, as well as in each of the 4 MPOs, CMAP, PSRC, SACOG, and WCOG. So looking at the distribution in the combined dataset, we see that people conduct a majority of their activities, which is 59%, in activity travel chains. The same can be said for SACOG, PSRC, and WCOG. Which shows that 54 to 67% of the activities are in activity travel chains. This chart represents the distribution of chained and unchained activity counts throughout the day for workers. We see two pronounced peaks between 7 to 9 a.m. and between 5 to 7 p.m., and one moderate peak between 12 to 2 p.m. for unchained activities. The distribution of chained activities has one pronounced peak between 5 to 7 p.m. and two moderate peaks between 7:30 to 9 a.m. and between 12 to 2 p.m. The morning and evening peaks for unchained and chained activities coincide with the usual commuting times. Okay, on the contrary, the trip distribution of non-workers carry out the majority of the unchained and chained activities in the off-peak hours between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. And there is no peak intensity for unchained activities within this time period, but for chained activities, we see a pronounced peak between 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. This slide presents the path diagram for the conceptual structural equation model, ACM, framework, showing the hypothesized relationships between the activity travel chaining propensity, travel time savings ratio, average daily trips, activity space area, mode use, represented by the proportion of NMT and transit trips, and peak and off-peak PMTs. There are a total of 10 endogenous variables which are affected by the exogenous variables on the left, representing socioeconomic and location characteristics. The color of the arrows shows the hypothesized direction of the direct effects. Green means positive and red means negative. So with this diagram, I present here the hypothesized relationships of two models, one for workers and one for non-workers. Same ACM or structural equation model works by simultaneously estimating the complex relationships through a set of linear equations comprising multiple endogenous and exogenous variables. The set of equations represent the mathematical formulation of ACM and portrays the specifications of as well as the interconnections among the 10 endogenous variables. Each equation here relates to one endogenous variable where the x and y represents the vectors of observed and exogenous and endogenous variables, respectively. The estimated ACM model, ACM provides a satisfactory goodness of fit across all major criteria, indicating that the hypothesized model is a reasonable representation of the underlying relationships in the data. So from this slide, I will present the results. And considering the direct effect between the activity travel chaining propensities of the three activity categories, subsistence, maintenance, and discretionary, and the outcome variables, which are the peak and off-peak PMTs, we see that increased activity travel chaining propensities increases peak and off-peak PMTs, except for the maintenance activities, which have negative effects, particularly for workers. And considering the direct effects on the four mediator variables, the results also show positive effects of activity travel chaining propensities on travel time savings ratio and activity space area for both workers and non-workers. And from the direct effects of activity travel chaining propensity on NMT and transit, we find positive effects of subsistence and discretionary activities on NMT usage, whereas all other effects of chaining on NMT and transit usage are negative. We also find that a larger activity space area increases peak and off-peak PMT for both workers and non-workers. And as expected, the increased use of NMT and transit results in lower peak and off-peak PMT for both of these groups. Finally, we calculated the total effects of activity travel chaining propensities on PMT by combining the direct and indirect effects. The indirect effects are those that are calculated through the mediator variables. So combining both of these effects, we find that except for the effect of chaining subsistence activities on off-peak PMT, all of the effects are positive. So this suggests that activity travel chaining increases the PMT in both peak and off-peak periods, and the mediator variables have a significant contribution to this relationship. So in the next two slides, we'll investigate more on how the mediator variables affect this relationship and what affects the most. Since we saw there is a change in sign between the direct and total effects, and this is contributed by the indirect effects through one or more of the four mediator variables. So as we mentioned, we are interested in seeing the magnitude of the indirect effects of the activity travel chaining through the mediator variables. And we saw that the total indirect effect is larger than the direct effect. As you can see in the bottom, the last two rows, comparing the direct effect between maintenance and PMT, the direct effects in magnitude is lower than some of the indirect effects. So we we separated out the path for each indirect effect and calculated the indirect effects of each path to compare them, considering our conceptual diagram. And comparing both the unstandardized and standardized coefficients for workers, we find that public transit has the highest mediation effect. So the combined total positive indirect effect between indirect effect of chaining maintenance activities on peak PMT, this actually flips the sign for the negative direct effect and makes the total effect positive. So for non-workers, we did the same calculation and find that that travel time savings ratio and number of trips and the size of activity space area largely contributes to the positive effect of chaining maintenance activities on the peak PMT. So here I present the main findings from the total effects of socioeconomic and location variables on activity travel chaining propensities and peak PMT. We find that workers and non-worker females have higher activity travel chaining propensities for all three activity types than worker and non-worker males, respectively. We also find that female workers have greater peak motorized PMT than male workers. And we find that workers aged 55 and above prefer to chain subsistence and maintenance activities, whereas non-workers in this age group prefer to chain discretionary and maintenance activities. Workers who only work from home has a positive inclination to chain more subsistence and maintenance activities, but has a lower peak PMT. And considering the location variables, find that higher population densities reduces activity chaining propensity and peak PMT of workers and non-workers. Lastly, a higher land use mix at the home location increases chaining of maintenance activities for workers and decreases their peak PMT, whereas a higher land use mix at work location reduces peak PMT. We didn't find any significant contribution of land use mix at work location on the chaining each of these activities. In summary, our analysis shows a positive and strong impact of activity travel chaining propensities on peak hour PMT for both workers and non-workers. The chaining of maintenance activities by non-workers in the off-peak hours appears to be substituting these activities in the peak hours, considering the change in the sign of the direct effects. We also find significant indirect effects of activity travel chaining propensities on PMT through the mediating variables, which provide opportunities to manage peak PMT. In particular, leveraging the positive association between NMT usage and subsistence and discretionary activity travel chains can help mitigate PMT during congested periods by improving walking and biking facilities near residences and major activity centers. And lastly, we also see that socioeconomic and location characteristics also distinguish the activity travel chaining behavior and its impact between workers and non-workers. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. Happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Tanjib. If anyone has any questions, we can take a couple of two. You can also post it on chat later. It's fine. So the next presenter is Louisa Owusu, and we do not have their recordings, and I think presenter is also not here. So we will go ahead with Siwei Hu from UC Irvine, and he will be discussing on a flexible agent-based model framework to evaluate integrated microtransit and fixed route transit, mode choice, supernetworks, and fleet simulation.
All right, thanks for the warm introduction. Let me quickly share my screen.
Mm-hmm.
Can anyone hear? Anyone see the slides? I think so.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. My name is Siwei Hu, and I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate from UC Irvine. I'm working with Professor Mike Hyland, who is also in the audience, and our co-workers, colleagues, Ritin and Jacob, who is also in the audience. So today I'll be presenting our recent work. The title of today's presentation is called A Flexible Agent-Based Model Framework to Evaluate Integrated Microtransit and Fixed Route Transit, Mode Choice, Supernetworks, and Fleet Simulation are three main components. And the collaborators are shown on the screen. So let's get to the main part of the talk. So we'll start. So today's talk will include 5 parts: introduction, problem description, methodology, simulation results, and conclusion. So let's talk about the introduction first. So the background of this research is the bus ridership has been declining steadily since 2006, especially during COVID pandemic. There's a dramatic decline in bus ridership. Almost all kinds of ridership from public transit. So you can see the graph, not just bus, but also heavy rail, heavy light rail, all those kinds of mode from public transit. And after the COVID pandemic, the public transit agency has been struggling to regain their pre-pandemic ridership. So, and at the background of this research also is the emergence of the transportation network companies. And also there's our various microtransit pilots from public transit agencies, including Micrometro from LA County, including Smart Ride from Sacramento area, Northern California, and also RTC On Demand from Las Vegas area. So let's have a little bit distinguish about between the transportation network company and microtransit. So transportation network company is for profit, but for microtransit, it's usually heavily subsidized by transit agencies. For example, the Micrometro is $1 per ride, Smart Ride is $2.5, and the one in Las Vegas is $2 per ride. So it's pretty low fare. And so researchers might think how we could better integrate the newly flexible microtransit service and the existing fixed route transit service. So this is fixed route transit vehicles. This might be the bus route. And then the passengers could walk to their bus stop or to take the microtransit to the bus stop. And this microtransit. So the purpose of this integration is probably we could bring back the transit ridership to increase the transit ridership, to increase mobility, increase accessibility, and increase sustainability like CO2. So, but there's a research gap between the integration of fixed route transit and microtransit, which is there are not many successful real-world examples for integrating them. So the research goal for this research is we plan to propose an integrated fixed and microtransit simulation model considering travelers' heterogeneity to evaluate different network and operation designs. So we study the 4 design parameters, fixed route transit headway, so which means how frequent you send the fixed route transit, maybe every 10 minutes, every 15 minutes, every 30 minutes. Microtransit fleet size, how many microtransit should we purchase for this area? And also the microtransit virtual stop coverage, how much virtual stops should we set for people to walk to the microtransit pickup location? And also operating hours, microtransit, how long shall we operate microtransit? And then let's look at the second part, problem description. So the proposed model is trying to solve the following problems. Given a set of travelers with their origin, destination, departure time, and individual attributes, and given a multimodal network with walking, fixed route transit, microtransit, and auto layers, which is available to all travelers. And we also have different design inputs: transit frequency, microtransit fleet size, virtual stop coverage, operating hours. And this model determines under the mode choice equilibrium, what are the mode and route choice for each travelers, and what are some of the system performance metric, including subsidy per transit rider, 15 minutes job accessibility, and vehicle miles travel. So let's look at how we model the system, and let's look at our methodology. So this is the overview of our methodology, and we have design parameters, which is what we described in the previous slides, from microtransit and fixed route transit. And we also have our demand module, which is how people choose different modes and different paths within those modes. And we also have a supply module, which is a multimodal transportation system. It's a framework. We have transit super network for the transit mode. We also have an auto network for the auto mode. So let's look at each of them in detail. So for the mode choice, we use a binary logic mode choice model to model people's mode choice between the transit mode and the auto mode, between transit mode here and the auto mode here. So we group the microtransit, fixed route transit, and walking layer into a composite transit mode. And then this is the binary logic choice model. And then by assuming the error turn following IID Gumbel distribution, so we could have the mode choice probability looks like this. And we just have 2 modes, composite transit mode and driving mode in this model. And we also have a multimodal least generalized cost pathfinding to calculate the deterministic part of the utility function, which is where my cursor is currently in. So how we calculate it? So we have a super network, have a multi-layers. So in this case, we have a microtransit layer, walking layer, fixed route transit layer. So every every travelers will start from the walking layers, and then you can see this might be a path that is found from our shortest path algorithm. You can see there's betas. So which means this shortest path finding algorithm have the demand input from the travelers. Each travelers, they have different betas. They evaluate this utility differently. And they also have the supply input, which is the walking time for a certain link and waiting time for from walking layer to microtransit layer. So whatever this shortest path algorithm tells us, this is the best in terms of generalized cost. So even though 2 travelers, they might share the same OD pair, but they might found different path for them because their betas, their individual attributes might be different. So one more comment about this method. Why this method is good, we think it's good, because we have 3 different layer, maybe more, and we have different waiting links, connecting each layers, representing the waiting time for the travelers. So it could have a flexible integration in the demand side. When passengers, they plan the path, we could allow it have whatever integration you want. But it's not we define what the integration is, but let the algorithm tells us what is the best integration for that travel. So we also have a SuperNet supply module. So it's a super network with a microtransit simulation. So this is super network, looks like this. And we use a microtransit simulation called FleetPy. It's open source, developed by colleagues from TU Munich. And in each iteration, we use the result from FleetPy microtransit simulation to update the microtransit waiting time and the microtransit link travel time, so that at the end of the day, we want to reach a full choice equilibrium. So, and then the convergence criteria, we use the squared percentage difference for mode choice probability between two consecutive iterations among all travelers. So what this means is from iteration n and iteration m-1, for the same traveler I, and the probability of traveler I choosing mode m prime. So we sum over all the modes for a single traveler, and we sum over all the travelers. So if this convergence criteria is less than a certain threshold, which we set it to 0.01 in this study, and then we think it reached the mode choice equilibrium. So let's look at some of the simulation results. So we test our framework in two different areas. One is downtown San Diego, have a better transit network, a more convenient transit network. And then Lemon Grove, which is another small city in San Diego County here in California. So it's kind of poor transit network. So based on these two results, we could kind of see what might be the best for different transit areas, from different areas. And then we have a one-day demand. The demands comes from the activity scene. And we can see here, both in downtown San Diego, the blue curve, and in the Lemon Grove, we have two peak, morning peak and evening peak. And we study the following four parameters: fixed route transit frequencies, microtransit fleet size, virtual stop coverage, and operating hours. And so this is the convergence analysis. So the left-hand side is the downtown San Diego. We test like 38 scenarios. So all the scenarios in downtown San Diego could be converged within 7 iterations. And the right-hand side is a Lemon Grove, and all the iteration could converge within 4 iterations. And so this is the fleet size for San Diego. So as we could see, as there's more fleet size, if you have more fleet size, you need more subsidy per trip. This is basically because the revenue generated by adding fleet size does not outweigh the cost of adding fleet size. So one of the takeaway may be you just keep your fleet size small, but we still need a further study to study what's the optimal fleet size for a certain area. And job accessibility, adding more fleet size, definitely more job accessible within 15 minutes. And this is the most share, as we could see, adding microtransit. So the orange part is microtransit. Adding microtransit, the fixed route transit portion will decrease, which means that the mode share for fixed route only will decrease. But if you consider the fixed route transit and the fixed route transit as a whole, as a transit mode, it will actually increase. So and then the blue part is the mode share for car. So if we introduce microtransit, the car mode share will decrease. And so the right-hand side is the modal VMT. So which means if you consider the total VMT as a whole, adding microtransit, it might not decrease VMT that much. But one thing is it will decrease the auto VMT. So virtual stop coverage, as we have more virtual stop, which means if 100% virtual stop is every walking node could be considered as a virtual stop for microtransit. Microtransit could pick up passengers at all the nodes. So if we increase the virtual stop, the transit subsidy per trip will decrease. So if for transit agency, probably we keep virtual stop as high percentage as possible. And then the right hand side is 15 job accessibility. As we increase the virtual stops, the accessibility does not change much. And here is the mode share. And here is the modal VMT. It doesn't change much. And this was the operating hours. As we have more operating hours, we might have more subsidy per users. As we operate more hours, the within hour accessibility might not change much. Yeah, and here is the orange part is the microtransit mode share. As we have more operating hours, yeah, microtransit have a larger share. And this is the modal VMT. And then this is the accessibility plot for the whole region. So in region like Lemon Grove, they have kind of not very convenient transit system. If we introduce microtransit, the accessibility in our data will be triple. So it will be greatly increased if you deploy microtransit in the relatively transit poor area. Fixed route only, fixed plus micro. And so, but our model could also output the trip length distribution, trip length analysis for each travelers, because it is an agent-based model. So you can see the walking mode might serve relatively short trips, microtransit, medium distance trips, maybe fixed route transit, longer trips. But for a Lemon Grove area, microtransit actually could serve a wide range of trips. And here is the existing transit network usage after we deploy microtransit. So this model could also tells us, oh, what might be the unproductive segment of your existing transit network. So that tells us the information, oh, maybe we could reconsider some of this segment, maybe remove them or maybe replace them with microtransit. So these are some of our conclusions. So this research, we propose an integrated fixed and microtransit model, determine each traveler's multimodal least generalized cost path. And we also study different output parameters, including subsidy, mode share, 15 minutes job accessibility, modal VMT, individual trip length distribution, and transit line usage. And we also show that the integrated fixed route transit with microtransit will decrease the fixed route transit ridership. But if you consider fixed route transit and microtransit as a whole transit mode, it will actually increase the mode share for that mode. Microtransit service require significant subsidy per transit users, especially in low demand and low fixed route transit coverage areas. And microtransit definitely could enhance regional accessibility, particularly areas with limited fixed route transit coverage. Yeah, so this is end of my talk. I also want to thank the funding sponsorship. And if you have any questions, please feel free to let us know.
Thank you, Sway. Anyone has any questions for him? No? Okay, so we can go ahead and start with the next presenter, Daud Ridoy from Virginia Tech, and he will be talking about capturing dynamics within tour-based departure time and choice behavior. So the presenter has uploaded his recording, and now Omid will start the presentation for us.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are doing well. I'm Daud Naviri, a graduate student at Virginia Tech. Welcome to my presentation on capturing the dynamics within a tool-based departure time choice behavior. So here is an overview of the presentation. Initially, I'll talk about the introduction and motivation behind this study, and followed by brief summary of the literature review and data sources for our empirical investigation. Lastly, I will talk about the key findings and policy analysis for our studies. Now, departure time choice plays a significant role in the process of travel decision making. And if we truly want to understand the network performance, we need to understand the traffic flow and the distribution of trips over time on that network. Now, if we look at uh, from the perspective of travel demand modeling, over the year there have been a lot of studies that solely focused on a trip-based approach for modeling departure time choice. Also, even in the activity-based models, the departure time choice model represents only the main tour's departure time choice. For example, if if I make two trips on a particular day, if I go from home to work and then return home, let's say for the first trip, my departure time choice is AM or morning peak period, and for the return trip my departure time choice is afternoon peak period or PM. Now, the tool should ideally represent the sequential departure time choices such as AM and PM. However, in the current activity-based literature, we only model the departure time choice of the main tour, which is AM. As a result, the tour departure time choice simplifies to a trip departure time choice, and the forecasting results are also inaccurate. Now, it is essential to understand the behavior of individuals for sequential choices, specifically for departure time choice, as the nature of the first choice is significantly influenced by the feature choices an individual will make. Or now, the motivation behind this study is to address this issue. So we focused on developing a dynamic model framework to understand the influence of several variables such as household, personal, socioeconomic characteristics on sequential departure time choices. So this is a summary of the models adopted in the past for departure time choice. So these studies consider the departure time choice as either continuous or time interval. Also, these studies mostly focused on the departure time choice for either work trip or non-work trip. Now, for the empirical investigation of our study, we used these two data sources. So we used the NHTS 2017 California add-on dataset and also the climate and justice screening tool. And then we combined these two datasets to create a master file, and we use that master file to do our descriptive analysis and model estimation. So combination of these two datasets help us to understand not only the influence of household, personal or trip related factors, but also the environmental burden, health disparities, socioeconomic factors on the departure time choice of an individual for sequential trips. So in our study, we consider 5 different departure time choice categories, and they are early morning, morning peak period, midday, afternoon peak period, and evening. So and we have defined some conditions to create our departure time choice conditions for 2 trips and 3 trips tour. So for the first trip, an individual has all the options available for their departure time choice. They can either pick early morning, midday, afternoon peak, evening. However, for the second trip, if someone starts their first trip in the early morning, they will have all the five options for their second trip. They can start their second trip in early morning, morning, midday, and so on. However, if someone starts their first trip in the midday, for their second trip they will have to start their second trip in the midday as well. And then because if someone starts their first trip in the midday, they cannot go back in time and start their second trip in the morning peak period or early morning period. So they will have to start their second trip from the midday as well. So this is how we defined our departure time choice combinations. And lastly, for the evening period, if someone starts their first trip in the evening period, they'll only have evening period to complete their rest of the trips. And their combinations, trip combinations will be evening for the two trips, and tour, and evening and evening for the three trips tour. Now, in terms of econometric model, we employed a closed form dynamic discrete choice model to estimate both two trips tour and three trips tour model. So one pivotal assumption of dynamic discrete choice model is that dynamic discrete choice model optimizes all the future choices while making the current choice. And to capture the influence of it can capture the influence of future expectation. So to capture the influence of future expectation, we estimated a discount factor, and as the value of the future expectation should be between 0 and 1, so we adopted a decay function for our study. So here are some of the key findings from our study. So we found that young individuals prefer early period of the time for the first trip, such as early morning or morning peak period, and later part of the day, such as PM peak or evening period for the returning trip, whereas the older adults prefer midday, PM peak period, and evening period for their first trip. One interesting thing we found is that older adults tend to complete their entire tour within the same time period. For example, if they start their first trip in the midday, their return trip is likely to be completed in the midday as well. And now, for the low income individuals, they prefer early morning peak period or PM peak period for their first trip. And on the other hand, high income individuals are likely to avoid early morning period for their first trip. Now, when we look at the influence of some health disparities of areas and communities, we found that areas with a higher percentile of current asthma patients are likely to avoid peak periods for their trips in a tour. So they are likely to avoid AM peak period for their first trip and the PM peak period for their returning trip. Also, we found that in areas with a higher percentile of diabetes among adults, they prefer early morning for their first trip and PM peak period for the returning home trip. And lastly, for areas with a higher percentile of traffic volume, they prefer PM peak period for the returning trip and avoid morning peak period for their first trip. And one interesting thing for the three tip tours we found is that in areas with a high percentile of coronary heart disease among adults, the AM and PM peak periods are likely to be avoided for the trips in the tour. So we also tested some other variables, but we did not add them in the presentation. So after estimating the two tip store and three tip store model, we used those models to assess the influence of some policy scenarios on traveler departure time choices, like the influence of different policy analysis on the departure time choice shifts. So we tested several policy analysis, and I'm showing these two as an example. We tested a toll cost of $5 in the AM peak period, and we noticed that it reduces the probability of choosing AM PM departure time choice combinations by 11.62%, and the choice combination shifts to midday for two trips to. And another one we tried is that we tried toll cost for AM peak period and PM peak period as well. So we tried $10 toll cost for AM peak period and $3 toll cost for PM peak period, and we found that it reduces the probability of selecting the peak periods AM peak and PM peak by around 20%, and shifts the departure time choice to midday. We also tested several other policy analyses for the three-tip store as well, and we found similar results. So in conclusion, we can say that understanding departure time choice for sequential trips is of paramount importance. Also, understanding the factors influencing them as well. And another thing we can do is that the modeling framework we develop, this could easily be integrated into an activity-based model. And lastly, based on the result, we recommended some policies. So one of the policies we recommended for that in areas or communities with a higher percentile of traffic volume, the corporate offices should identify the employees that live nearby and follow a similar route to work. So what they can do, they can provide shuttle services or shared more services for their employees, and it will reduce the car uses of the employees. As a result, it will improve the traffic congestion scenario and also reduce the gas emissions. Another recommendation we made for areas or communities with a high percentile of asthma patients and exposure to diesel particulate matter is that the government officials can work with the environmental agencies to educate people and promote green transportation, because awareness plays a significant role in selecting or shifting to a new policy. So if we can aware them or educate them about the environment, about the environmental impact it has on the people, and if we can promote green transportation and a sustainable active mode of transportation, it will help reduce the carbon emission and improve the air quality. So I'm at the end of my presentation. If you have any question, feel free to contact us. Thank you.
Any questions for Dr. Hasnini? Okay, so you can always post your questions in the chat or email author directly. We'll go with the next presentation. Divyakant Talyan from Northwestern University. He will be presenting on latent transition analysis, consumer spending. Oh, so Sivi, are you going to present?
Oh no, I'm just feeling excited to hear Dr. D's presentation.
Sorry, so can you guys see my screen, or are you seeing the other side of the presentation?
We can see the other side.
Okay. How about now?
Now, yes, now we can.
Oh, perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Priyanka, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for joining today. I'm Divyakant Talyan. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Northwestern University Transportation Center. I study transportation, human behavior, the choices we make, and most of my work has been primarily around the pandemic and how some of the choices we have been making around transportation or other choices which directly or indirectly impact transportation have changed, and to what extent those changes have been permanent. Today, I'm presenting one of the studies that we did on understanding consumer spending. And I'm presenting specifically a framework called latent transition analysis with random intercepts. The idea behind it is relatively simple, and I'll talk about it in detail very soon. The main motivation behind the study was that we also that how consumer spending on online versus in person, be it for grocery, be it for ordering food online versus in person, etc., has changed over the last few years. And we wanted to get a better sense of how permanent those changes are. And if they are permanent, then obviously that will have a strong impact on transportation, because a lot of the physical travel that we do as consumers is probably gonna move on the fleet end, gonna move on the last mile delivery, and etc. So there's a lot of interaction between transportation and some of the choices that we make as consumers. The key idea behind it was that we wanted to try to understand not just who is ordering online, who is ordering, who is doing things in person, but the key idea is around that as consumers, we really make portfolio of choices. There is really no person who is making just online or just physical and so on and so forth. There is a sort of different type of people. There are people who are making all of these choices online. But at the same time, they do make a lot of physical travel choices as well for these things. At the same time, someone who may be ordering online for grocery may not be ordering online for food, etc. And there is this whole portfolio of choices that we make as consumers, and we wanted to get a better sense of how these portfolios look. At the same time, how these portfolios are changing over time, especially during the pandemic, where we did see a lot of interaction between how the pandemic is evolving versus how the choices of consumers are evolving. So there is a component of multiple choices, and then there is a component of temporality, and we wanted to capture all of that in a single framework, and that's where we introduced a latent transition analysis with random intercept. The idea historically of analyzing, let's say, multiple choices has been that we want to use a model to predict jointly these multiple choices. But our idea was slightly different, that we didn't want to really predict them, but we want to sort of split the data into classes or clusters, and we wanted to understand those clusters in a better way. And the idea was not just to have those clusters, but also understand how those clusters are changing over time and how people are moving across clusters. That gives us a sense of how the temporality of behavior is changing over time. And eventually we want to try to know whether some of the behaviors that are sort of emerging during the pandemic, are they stable over time or not? And that's where the idea of latent transition analysis with random intercept comes into picture. I'll talk about it in detail on what it is, what it does, or what it doesn't. The data that we are using is coming from a longitudinal tracking survey that we have been doing for a few years now. We haven't done a latest update on it. The last one we did was in March of 2022. There's a parallel survey we are doing on the employers as well for mostly remote work, on which we have done a latest update in 2024, but this one ends in March of 2022. We do have a nationally representative sample. We have people from pretty much, I think, all 50 states, maybe 49, if I recall correctly. We have about 785 unique respondents in the survey. Some of are in there all the waves, some of them are only in some of the waves, and some of them are in, let's say, only one wave or two wave, and so on and so forth. In this study, we are using data from 4 different time points. We have data pre-COVID, how some of the choices people were making pre-COVID were. We have data from December of 2020, which is pretty early in the pandemic. We have data in March 2021, and then we have data 1 year after March 2021, which is March of 2022. And we have 10 different indicators of consumer spending. These are binary indicators. We do have more detailed data, but for the sake of this study, we are restricting ourselves to binary indicators. And these 10 binary indicator corresponds to two different spending and acquisition aspects. On the spending category aspects, we have data on whether or not you are shopping or you have spent any money in the last week when we did the survey on grocery, cooked food, and non-food items. And on top of that, we have that information on acquisition channel as well, as in whether the spending that you have done has been in person, pickup, takeout, or delivery. And for every person, we have these 10 indicators at 4 different time points. That makes it 40 response items from a person over 4 different time points that I mentioned, and which is also there on top of the slide. The key idea behind later transition analysis begins like this. It's an extension to what we call a latent class analysis. Many of us are typically familiar with latent class analysis. In very simple terms, it's nothing but a clustering algorithm. However, the clustering is stochastic, which means you don't get just who belongs to what cluster, you get what is the probability of a person belonging to a cluster versus the other. In a latent class analysis, you can also add what we call covariates. So these are, for example, social demographic information. And the idea is that you want to try to understand, okay, I know who belongs to what cluster or who is more likely to be in what cluster. Are there social demographic information that can that are correlated with this cluster membership or cluster participation? So for example, someone who is young may be more likely to be in cluster where people use a lot more online shopping or ordering food from Uber Eats, etc. The idea behind latent transition analysis is that we want to extend that latent class on a temporal scale. Which means that we have now classes not at one time point, but 2 or 3 or 4 different time points. And we want to understand what different latent clusters or classes exist at different time points. We can also try to understand who is moving between different classes over time. And that's the key part that later transition analysis helps us do that. And I'll show a lot of our results based on that as well. A key component of a latent transition analysis is this arrow that you are seeing that goes from C1 to C2. This is what we call a transition matrix. And the idea is it gives you the probability of transitioning from one latent class to another latent class over time. If you have 3 or 4 different time points, you will have not one latent transition, not one transition matrix, but 2 or 3 different transition matrices. And extending the idea of covariates, explaining latent classes, you can now also add covariates on the transitions to try to understand who is more likely to transition from one behavior of cluster to another. And that's what sort of the benefit of a temporal analysis is. And that was what was the key goal for the study as well. We wanted to understand the temporality of changing behavior over time. What we present is not a latent transition analysis, but another extension to that, which is known as a random intercept latent transition analysis. The idea behind that is your LTA or a latent transition analysis only captures part of the correlations that exist in the data, but then there are parts which are typically not captured, and that leads to some loss of efficiency in the results that we have. And we wanted to sort of take care of those extra correlations as well, which are between choices that one individual is making over time. And since these choices are coming from a single individual happening over time, those choices are correlated with each other. And if we don't correct for those correlations or capture those correlations, that impacts the results of the transition matrix that we're estimating. There are different ways of looking at it. If you are coming from a more econometric transportation based econometric specifically background, we often talk about random intercept quite a lot, mostly in panel data sets. If you're coming from more of a psychology or psychometry background, then you might have heard things like multi-level analysis, where you have within person variation versus within subject and between subject variations. And this allows us to separate that, to look at the data in a much better way compared to when you don't allow for that. And even in this, you can add covariates to understand some of the behavior that is specific to these choices, which are temporally stable, or the effects that are temporally stable between people. And I'll show some of the results to specific to that as well later in the slides. On a mathematical level, there are really three different type of parameters that we estimate in a latent transition analysis. One of that is these delta terms. This is nothing but, we call them latent class prevalence, but this is nothing but gives you what percentage of people belong to a latent class at a time point. And since we are doing temporal analysis, this delta varies over time, which means this gives you an idea of what percentage of people belong to a latent class at time point 1, time point 2, time point 2, time point 4, and so on and so forth. And the idea is that by looking at how these percentages are varying over time, you get a sense of how the behavior is varying over time. And that's what really is the key here. The second set of parameters are these rho values, which we call item response probabilities. This is nothing but that gives you an idea of what is the meaning of a latent class, or how a latent class is defined. When you look at these values, this will give you an idea of, for someone who is in this latent class, what is the probability of them spending, let's say, more than $0 on in-person shopping or online shopping, etc. And the third parameter is called a transition matrix, as I mentioned, that gives you the idea behind what is the probability of someone transitioning from a latent class to another between two consecutive time points. If it's too much math, don't worry about it. The results are going to be a lot more intuitive than this. This was for latent transition analysis. We expand that to a latent transition analysis with a random intercept. And the idea is that the item response probabilities, which are given here at the lower half of this plot, they are not uncorrelated. There is residual correlation that needs to be captured, and those are captured with this latent factor F, which is temporally stable, which means it doesn't have a time index to it. It's just F of I, where I stands for an individual. And this is what allows us to have correlations between choices made by a single person over time, and that corrects for some of the issues that exist in LTA in terms of separation of between subject and within subject variation. Our model has several key features that we include to do various different things. One of them is what we call measurement invariance. The idea behind measurement invariance is that your latent class definitions, or the item response probabilities that I mentioned in 2 slides ago, they don't vary over time. And what this does is it helps you to make sure that your latent class definitions is not changing over time. That helps both the estimation as well as the interpretation. Estimation is better because you are now estimating significantly less number of parameters, and interpretation is better because your latent class definitions, since they are not changing, you can now just interpret the other parameters as the change in those parameters, so change in the percentage of people between different classes over time. So from an interpretation standpoint, it just becomes significantly easier to do, and that will make more sense once I present the results. We also add covariates to our analysis to try to understand different things. One of them is here in the random intercept factor. One of them is here between trying to understand who is more likely to be in what cluster versus other. And then we also try to understand who is more likely to transition from one cluster to another. Our covariate analysis is, I would say, relatively less robust because of the sample size that we have available. For a complicated model like this with about hundreds of different parameters, having somewhere between 2,000 to 3,000 sample size makes it a lot better to do. But we only have about 785 observations, which makes some of the covariate analysis robust, but we still try to do our best to make sure the results that we are getting are making sense. The parameters that we are getting have the right intuition, associated with them. And I'll present some of the results specific to those as well very soon. Another important aspect that we include our analysis is we use full information maximum likelihood for estimation. The idea behind full information maximum likelihood is that whenever you have longitudinal data set, there is going to be missing information because you have responses or you have respondents who are not present in all different waves of your longitudinal data set. If you don't account for that missingness in your analysis, that significantly biases your estimation results. And a way to account for that missingness is through full information maximum likelihood, which we do in the estimation part, and that helps us ensure that the results that we have accounts for the missingness in the data set. And that is really required for any longitudinal analysis that you are doing, especially if you only have a limited sample size, and if your sample size is very small, and if you account for missingness by removing all the observations where you have missing data, then your sample size is gonna go even significantly down. So this is sort of the state-of-the-art way of accounting for missing data in any sort of analysis like this. And we do also include sample weights to make sure our analysis is done at a more nationally representative level, and that sample weight, including sample weight, does allow us to do that. I'm gonna go over the results. When we did this analysis, we came up with 5 different latent classes of behavior, and then we are studying the changes on that behavior over time. And I'll go over the 3 different parameters that I mentioned earlier, one by one, so that it helps you understand exactly what's going on in the multidimensional data that we are analyzing. So if you look at the table on the left, the bottom part of it is what is known as the item response probabilities. As I mentioned, we have 5 different latent classes. So each column is for one latent class. So you can see on top of this figure, you have names that we have given to different latent classes. So for example, the first one is named I primarily shop in person, but love Amazon too. The second is called I eat at home. Third is why pay for delivery. Fourth is I trust you with my delivery. And fifth is I pick up when I can. Not everyone likes these names. We had a huge debate about how do we name these different classes. Whenever I share these with anyone, the reaction I get is very dividing. Some people like these names, some don't. But I think what is more important is the numbers that are there in the latent classes we find. So for example, if I look at just the first column, we have grocery in person. The value of item response probability is 0.995. What it tells you is that given you are in latent class 1, your probability of spending for grocery in person is almost 1, which means for someone in this class, their probability of spending in person for grocery is very, very high, which means they do their grocery in person. However, that doesn't mean that they don't do grocery for pickup or delivery. They can do that. And that is shown in these item response probability for grocery pickup and grocery delivery as well, which is kind of not super low there, on low to medium end, which means at least there are some people in this group who are doing grocery pickup and delivery as well. However, mostly people in this class do grocery in person, not for pickup and delivery. For food, dine-in and takeout, the probabilities are relatively high. However, for pickup and delivery, they are moderate. For other, which is non-food item, the probabilities are very high. And for delivery, it's also relatively high. Contrast this class with the second group, where you see that the grocery in-person probabilities is really high. However, individuals in this group don't do pickup, delivery, dine-in. There is some probability for takeout and pickup for food, very low probability for delivery for food, moderate probabilities for other items for in-person and pickup, in-person and delivery, but relatively low for pickup. What is interesting is the fourth and the fifth class, where you see that the probability of grocery delivery is very high, the probability of non-food item delivery is very high, and the fifth class, the probability of grocery pickup is very high. This is how what the classes look like, and what we want to understand is how these behaviors have changed over time. And you can look at that with the top part of this figure, where you see pre-COVID, the first class was about 55% of the population. However, as COVID hit during wave 1, 6, and 7 in December 2020, March 21, and March 2022, that class has shrunk down from 55% of the data to 8%, 7%. And then in March 2022, when most COVID concerns were gone, that class was about 14 to 15% of the data. The second class, which was I eat at home, which means there is not much discretionary spending happening for individuals in this group. That population was about 8 to 9% of the data, but that expanded to about 42 and 44%, and then has sort of shrunken down to 31% of the data. Similarly, if you look at the fourth and fifth class, that was 5 and 7%, has increased to about 14%, 14%, and 7%. These are the individuals who do very high grocery delivery and non-food item delivery. Similarly, for pickup, that percentage used to be 7, increased to 18, 15, and 13. So there is this shift in behavior towards these non-in-person shopping to one, people who are doing in-person shopping. However, they are not spending as much on outside food, which is understandable because during COVID, eating out was both riskier, as well as we also saw very high, was leading to making some of these things very expensive. At the same time, you see the delivery and pickup parts where you see almost 2 to 3-fold increase in people doing grocery delivery and other deliveries. And some of that is seemingly relatively stable over time as well. So we were from 5 to 14, 14, and 17. So that number isn't really going down over time, which means there has been an increase in at least grocery delivery, is what we are saying. For pickup, the increase was pretty high, but we do see a trend of some of those percentages going down. The right side of the figure is what is the latent transition matrices. The way to understand is that if this is 1 to 1, this 0.14 value gives you the probability of someone who was in class 1 pre-COVID and stayed in class 1 during the wave 1 of the data. Similarly, you see here someone who was in class 1 during December 2020 and then stayed in class 1 during wave 6, which was March 2021, and so on and so forth. What is interesting here is if you look at the diagonal values of these matrices, you see in the initial phase between pre-COVID to wave 1, there is a lot of transitions happening. However, when we looked at the data between December 2020 and March 2021, the diagonal values, most of them are relatively close to 1 or 0.8, 0.9, so forth, which means there's a lot of behavioral stability around this period. But then as we went in time, transition from COVID to sort of the non-COVID-ish period, that stability has disrupted again, and people are maybe going back to some of their pre-COVID behavior. A lot of that dynamics between classes you don't see very clearly here, and that's why we combined the results from the two figures. I guess I did have some animations that I didn't show, but we combined the results from the two figures into this Sankey plot, and you can see 5 different classes at 4 different time points, and you can see what percentage of people are moving from what class to another class, and so on and so forth. The class 1, which was primarily in person, did split significantly, where some people stayed the same, some people moved from there to not eating out, some people moved from there to going towards delivery, going towards pickup. And then during this middle period of December 2020 and 2021, there is a lot of stability in the behavior. However, now we have seen some transition back to, for example, delivery and pickup, to more in-person niche behavior as well. However, the second class, which is I eat at home, I don't eat out that much, was still relatively expanding, which was understandable because in 2022 we were seeing a lot of inflation, which was potentially prohibiting people from eating out that much. We did look at the covariates part of this analysis as well, trying to understand who is in what class, who is not in what class, and so on and so forth. One of the components of that covariate model was the random intercept model. What it does or represents, it gives you the latent residual spending propensity, which simply means who is the individual who are spending anything in a given week when we ask them whether or not did you spend anything in these categories or not. And this shows that households with at least one child are more likely to spend in a given week. Households in urban location are more likely to spend in a given week. Households without a car are less likely to spend in a given week. This doesn't has anything to do with online versus in-person and so forth at all. This is just sort of capturing some of the additional heterogeneity in the data. However, what is more interesting is this second part of the model, which gives you the propensities, which gives you the effects for who is more likely to be in what latent class and who is more likely to be transitioning from one latent class to another class. And this is where you see that if you are a respondent with highest education level as graduate, you are more likely to do a lot more in-person shopping and spending out, which is you're more likely in class 1. If you are a respondent with a white ethnicity, you are more likely to not spend on eating out, which is represented by class 2 and 3. What was more interesting and to us and was one of the key goals was to try to understand the transitions. And that's where you see this is the model for transition from pre-COVID class 1 to any of the 5 classes that we have. And that's where we see this very strong effect of if you are a household without a car, you are a lot more likely to move to using delivery for grocery or other items, which is understandable because especially during the COVID when transit was also not available, who is more likely to really switch to delivery for groceries or other items is the people who can't travel otherwise, either transit or car and so on and so forth. And we see that in the model being captured very strongly as well. That gives us some confidence in that, one, we are capturing trends that make sense. Of course, some of this needs to be refined with a larger sample size, given the complexity of the model that we are dealing with. But at least some of the effects that we were able to capture were making sense. And all of this was done in a very joint framework setup. I think that was it on the results. Some of the key takeaways, at least from my point of view, is that there does seem to be an increase in grocery delivery, pickup, etc., due to the pandemic. But of course, our data ends in March 2020. It would be interesting to see how some of that looks now, maybe in 2024, which needs a new wave of some of the surveys that we have done. And hopefully that can help us try to understand this sort of the temporal stability of some of those behaviors. But at least during that 2-year period where we were capturing all of that, we did see 2 to 3 times increase in the use of delivery and pickup services, as well as a lot of stability in behavior for these things. Of course, how they look like now, that's gonna be that's yet to be revealed with the new data that we hope to collect very soon. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the questions.
Thank you, Divyakan. We have a couple of questions in the chat box.
Okay,
Or
let me
if
go with that. So first is, humans are impulsive. How does that inform your probabilities? I would say that's a good question. I'm assuming that if there is a lot of variation in your behavior, that does get captured through maybe transition between classes over time a lot. So maybe the when we did the survey, we asked you what you did in the last week. You show up some behavior, and then the next time we did it, you show up some other behavior. So someone who is maybe impulsively doing these things and is not making very stable choices, you'll show up as someone who is changing these classes of behavior a lot more than someone who is strictly in one class and staying in that class over time. So from the model, you can actually get the probability of being in a pathway for an individual. I don't know if you can still see my slides, but if you, I'm hoping you are, but if you see the slide I'm currently showing, this shows 5 raised to power 4 different possible pathways that you can take with 4 different time points and 5 different classes. And someone who is maybe impulsive and changing behavior over time does get captured as someone for whom the probability of sticking in a class over time is relatively low. And you can actually calculate that and estimate that probability from the model very easily. And we do have those numbers that we can crunch, but I don't have them readily available. I hope that answers your question, Kenneth. Second question is, that is a major problem with autonomous vehicle. Human behavior are very hard to predict. I completely agree with that. I think humans are very heterogeneous. They have very different needs, preferences, etc. And there is only sort of an extent to which you can predict that. What is really important, and I think we need to study it a lot more, is where exactly that residual variation is coming from. Because if we have to design systems for the people, there is a lot in that variation, or so to say, there is a devil in the details that we often miss in the models that we do, where we do a lot of average behavior understanding, but a lot of the variation that we can capture, we often fail to capture given the models that we're dealing with, is where really we should be focusing on. Another question from Kenneth is, seasonally, those probabilities would be different in northern climates. I absolutely agree, Kenneth. The goal here was not to have these probabilities maybe on a regional scale. These are essentially national level averages, I would say. If I would have to do it for a specific region of the US, I would use more local data set, or I can have these probabilities being made as a function of maybe climate in which you are in, maybe average temperature of the month in which we did the study, and that should be able to give you some differences in probabilities as a function of the climate of the region you are in. But we haven't done that, but that's absolutely a direction that one could take. Another question from Kenneth is, do you have a list of all the data elements you gathered? I'm curious how detailed your analysis is. Have you talked with the 90 plus study which have So Kenneth, we do have a report on our survey that we have been doing for over a couple of years now. I think it's you should be able to find it on the US DOT repository. I think it's called Rosa P. And I think if you search my name, you will find a report which explains the details of our survey. It has everything we have asked in 7 different waves of data collection that we have done. And if you just go in there, find it, you will be able to have access to that detailed report on the survey. Or if you want to just write an email to me, I'm happy to send that to you as well. On the 14,000 seniors, I'm not sure about the question, Kenneth. If you can elaborate that, that would be great. on the grocery pickup or delivery is often free for the first year. I absolutely agree. Eventually, I think all of it mostly boils down to economics. I feel, for the most part, at least on the aggregate level, to what extent a lot of those people who did get those free pickup or delivery options for the first year are gonna continue for the following years is really about how much value it brings you as a consumer, uh, and that may be very different based on how much you are being asked to pay for some of those services. I hope that addresses the question. I can take a few more questions if you have.
Any more questions? If not, I think we had one more presenter who is not present here today, Louisa Owusu, and I would like to go through his slides together with you guys so that we can see what the study is all about. Let me share my screen. Let me know if you guys can see my screen. Can you? So Louisa Owusu has MSc, and the study is about transportation mode preferences and traffic in Ghana's urban cluster employment zones. So they have mostly looked at congested area in Ghana and looked at numerous studies who have focused on the congestion issue in that area, and they found that the literature is limited on focusing on relationship between transport mode preferences and its effects on traffic experience. So with this, the objective of their study is to determine modes of transport used in those clustered employment area, to investigate influence of transportation choices in that area, and also analyze effect of transportation modes and demographics on travel time spent between home and work area, I guess. And they're looking at a place called Adam. They have designed a questionnaire, and it has quantitative and qualitative questions. Study population mainly focuses on private business owners and managers in Ghana. And based on the questionnaire, they have done some data analysis. So the demographics of the population, we have 42% female, more than 70% of the population are below 45 of the age. We have a young population here. More than 85% of the people holds diploma. 32% of the people holds a vocational degree, and 16% holds diploma. 43% of the total people are senior members and senior staff members. And they are trying to determine the modes of transportation they have used in that area. So I'm guessing 11% of the total population are female and are using personal vehicle. 16% of the total population are male and using personal vehicle. 35% are using Troto, which I'm guessing is a public transit there. 25% females are using Troto. Taxi is 5 and 9%. So we have 60% of the people using Troto there. And taxi is 14%. 27% people are choosing personal vehicles, and very few people are opting for motorcycle and walking. So they try to investigate the factors that influence transport choices. And these are reasons the people must have chosen, the reason why they are using a specific mode. So personal vehicle was picked because it's high in comfort. So I'm guessing it's 14%. And then Troto and taxi, they are easy to access. So 24 and 19% of the people have chosen that. And also they both public transit are competitive on prices. And yeah, so reasons for choosing looks like both are same. So to investigate effects of transportation mode on travel time, they are using ordinal regression for trips from work to home, and they analyze demographic factors to predict, I guess, time spent during the commute trips, I'm guessing. And with age, so I can see family size is significant, primary mode choice is significant. With age and education status, time spent in commuter travel increases. With family size, again, the travel time is spent is higher, I guess. And marital status has negative impact. I'm guessing it's a binary variable with one being married. So in conclusion, it says that public transport, which includes Troto and taxi, are major preferred transportation, regardless of the gender. Transportation mode choices are influenced by fares and their accessibility, as we saw for the public transit. Family size and primary modal choice are significant factors for the time spent in traffic from house to work. And yeah, I think that this one is the repetitive. And the choice of transportation mode significantly affects the experience you spent in the traffic. And there is acknowledgement. If you have any questions, please feel free to email Louisa Owusu or the professor. And thank you for being here in the session. We have